So we had another book flip through. I think this is number 18. We're almost to the end. This is a book that I got just before the Christmas holidays, and I read it over the break, and I really enjoyed it. This is Kimono, Kyoto to Catwalk. This is the book put out by the V&A, the Victoria and Albert Museum, to commemorate their exhibition that they had, and this is the book that goes with it. It is a gorgeous book, as you can see. It's very large. It's reasonably heavy, and it is all about kimono, and not just about contemporary kimono or sort of historical kimono, but about what role the kimono has played in Japanese society, in the Western marketplace, in fashion over its entire lifespan. And it talks about a lot of the production techniques, the kind of forces that were in play in regulating kimono, in terms of sumptuary laws, including marketplace, global markets, and the kind of complex interactions that informed kimono design and creation. It's a really good book. I would definitely recommend it. Beautiful illustrations. It has really nice texture on the papers and on the photos. You can definitely feel the difference. And it smells really good, actually. It's one of these really nice, rich, inky smells from a good quality book. Lots of beautiful photos from all sorts of places. Beautiful, beautiful kimonos, and lots of different interpretations, again, including contemporary, which is always really nice to see. So one of the reasons I really appreciate this book is not just because of the beautiful detail shots, but because, so this book really discusses the complexities involved in the history of kimono. Certainly as somebody who makes comics and Japanese influenced comics, I have encountered people who act like Japanese culture is somehow pure, like prior to the end of the Second World War, Japan had no contact with the West, or, there was no westernization, and really they fetishize and have Japanese culture and have very, very strange conceptions about that. Those people should read this book, or books like this, because this book talks about the very complex network of trade and culture that kimonos are situated in. And it's really important to understand that Japan always had contact with other countries for trade. They had contact prior, of course, everybody knows they have contact with Europeans like the Dutch and the English, but they also had lots of contact with China, with Korea, with India, and you have kimono patterns that are inspired by this really Indian design. That was a very normal thing. Japan has always, as a small island nation, always traded with lots of different countries. And, a lot of their horses came from Korea and China. That's totally a part of the history. And so I think it's important to understand that, and important to understand that kimono were also influenced this and were part of this network. So you have fabrics coming from overseas, you have patterns coming from overseas. You also have, after contact with Europeans was established and you had trading ports established, you had kimono that were being specifically produced for a European marketplace. That also happened. So I think it's important to have a really holistic approach to the topic, and this book definitely does that. It's really well researched. Again, here we have some examples of material produced for European markets. Yeah, a really, really lovely book and well worth reading. I'll probably read it again later in the year. And at the end, we have the incorporation of all sorts of, so just to give an example, these are the kimono that were very popular prior to and during the Second World War in Japan. They have very military motifs. They also had a very specific role in society. Yeah, super interesting. Again, this is kimono fabric used to produce dresses for the Western market. Really cool. And I really love that this book talks about the influence that kimonos have had on Western clothing and on the Western silhouette, and how important the kimono was to loosening up the silhouette for women, and that it wasn't just an issue of exoticization or Orientalism. It was a really fundamental shift in tailoring when kimonos came over, and that people began to see that you didn't have to have such form-fitting garments. You could have things that were looser, and the wrap closure especially So when people talk about things like cultural appropriation, I mean, obviously we don't want to do yellowface, but the kimono has really been for hundreds of years influencing Western fashion. And there's always been a back and forth dialogue, just like Western fashion has also influenced Japanese fashion. And that should always be remembered. Really beautiful contemporary kimono design. They have some really nice interviews with some contemporary designers and some national living treasures. This one especially is amazing. Really great to see these in this book. I would definitely recommend it. And at the end, we have a chapter talking about how contemporary Western, but especially contemporary Japanese designers have really changed the aesthetic of the kimono to try to make it fresher. I think it's important to remember that what a lot of people think of as sort of traditional kimono is actually a post-war development. I mean, I already knew that, but this book makes it very explicit and discusses it a lot more. And that really the codification of the kimono and the expense of wearing them became so severe that in the aftermath of the economic crash in the 1980s, nobody could buy kimono. They were way too expensive. And nobody's going to spend the equivalent of thousands of euros or thousands of dollars on a garment you can only wear a few times a year, or even once, like for a wedding kimono, during an economic crash in the aftermath of recession. It just doesn't happen. And so the kimono industry has really had to survive and adapt and understand that, you shouldn't be trying to make it such an exclusive codified garment if you want people to buy them and wear them and to support the arts and the crafts in this manner, which is really good to see. And I think it's important to understand that if you go to Japan and you go to a kimono rental shop in Kyoto or Tokyo, and you, as a foreigner, you want to rent a kimono, they're not going to accuse you of cultural appropriation. They're going to ask you how you want to pay and can we sell you a photo package? That is the reality of it. These are very expensive and time-consuming garments. Of course, you can get cheaper versions now. I have 2 yukata that I bought in Japan, so the lightweight summer kimono, and I do wear them still in the summer because it's so hot here sometimes. So it's really good to see a book that also looks at the contemporary trends and is very much from, A to Z. It's not a book that tells you how to wear kimono, but it talks about how people have used them and how they continue to be used and their role and their place in society. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, I would definitely recommend this book. It was not super cheap, but it wasn't super expensive either. And it's a really beautiful book. I'm really happy to have it in my collection. And I would definitely recommend picking it up if you're into fashion history, costume design, and stuff like that.